On August 26th, a Chinese Y-9 reconnaissance plane flew along the eastern side of the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. It entered Japanese airspace over the small uninhabited Danzhou Islands for 2 minutes at 11:29 a.m. Beijing denied the flight incursion was intentional. This despite Japanese warnings and jets scrambled to intercept the craft. On August 31st, a Chinese Navy survey ship entered Japan's territorial waters west of Kuchino-Erabu Island around 6 a.m. It left the waters southwest of Yakushima Island at around 7:53 a.m. Japan sent a minesweeper and patrol plane to monitor the Chinese vessel. It marked the 10th entry by a Chinese survey ship into Japanese waters off Kagoshima Prefecture since November 2021. Professor, let me come to you first. So how serious are these incidents and what's the feeling in Tokyo as a result?
Well, we are trying to figure out what has happened, so we don't know yet how serious they are, but two incursions have significantly increased the uncertainty of Beijing's intention and the risk involved. And we also had a very exceptionally large typhoon approaching to Japan. So we had two typhoons at the time that put us on alert.
Right. So a period of instability. And also, Professor, China as well as Taiwan obviously claim Senkaku Islands, but does Beijing also, in fact, claim the southwestern tip of Japan, those islands there? Yes.
They have claim based on the rules of the extinct Sinocentric order, which is quite different from say, international law under the Westphalia international system. So apparently, Beijing and Tokyo and Washington have a quite different worldviews.
Right. And so you see this as a very major threat to Japan's sovereignty as a result?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right, okay. And Eugene, do you see this perhaps as retaliation from Beijing? Because there was an incident in July when Japanese destroyer sailed into Chinese territorial waters. They were basically surveying the military exercises that were happening there at the time.
Yeah, I think that we can definitely look at this as a retaliatory act by China, not only in response to the event that you mentioned with Japan, but also right now we see a lot of increasing tension between the U.S. and China. I don't think it was a coincidence that these activities happened around the same time that U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was in Beijing for a lot of meetings. There's been a lot of contention between Washington and Beijing over a whole host of issues. So I think definitely this is China sending a message both in the air and in the sea.
Oh, so you see that the message is actually to the U.S., but Japan is at the receiving end of all of this.
Well, I think the message can be to multiple players, including to the U.S., but also to Japan. We're seeing a lot of increased friction, obviously, between those bilateral ties between the U.S. and China, but also with a lot of U.S. allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific region. So, I think this message is being sent to a lot of different players, not just to U.S. or Japan.
Yeah, but it's also a huge escalation because there is a difference between ships sailing into territorial waters. There is the idea of innocent passage, but to actually fly into, Professor, I direct this to you, into a sovereign airspace is a completely different matter.
Completely different. There is no innocent passage in airspace because, a flying object, the velocity is so fast, so there is no moment for the deliberation. So once you see that unidentified foreign airplanes intrude into your airspace, that could be intercepted immediately. But Japan did not do that because of our domestic legal constraint under the pacifist constitutions.
Yeah. So Eugene, how dangerous was that move, given what we've heard from Professor?
Right. So I think this is definitely can be looked at as an escalatory move. Yet at the same time, I think China, the U.S., Japan, and really all parties in the region do have an interest to make sure that those escalations are contained. Right now we're talking about temporary, albeit significant, intrusions into airspace. The maritime issue, we've seen actually several incidents like that over the past year. But as we talked about before, there is definitely a message being sent about China's unhappiness with the developments going on in the military space, but also in the economic space, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. But at the same time, I think that all parties have an interest in making sure to prevent any kind of major military escalation from happening.
Right. Professor, putting that aside in terms of messaging and retaliation, what do you believe that Beijing got out of it, in terms of a military or reconnaissance aspect?
That this Air Force spy plane came into the Japanese airspace, but we don't know the actual military objective. But also, we don't know the political motive. But of course, we can speculate, and then.
The speculation is about the fact that Danjo Islands are close to Fuku and Shimokoshiki, where they have essentially the defense ministry's radar facilities that can basically detect ballistic missiles. Is that correct?
Not really, but they like to make sure how we could intercept incoming aircraft from China with our air defense system. And also, Kyushu Island, one of the 4 major islands, has a major US and a maritime SDF, Self-Defense Force, naval fort. So they like to make very much interested in how the Japan and the US, these 2 navies, coordinate our military actions.
Yes. Very interesting point there, Eugene, that coordination, because as you said, there's been a lot of activity. There's also been the announcement that there's going to be a new US command in Japan, where there will be a 4-star military general who is making decisions on the ground there and essentially upgrading US forces in Japan. So, what do you think Washington, what message is being received by Washington there?
Right. So I think that the U.S. is really trying to shore up its solidarity with a number of regional allies. We've already talked about Japan. The South China Sea, there's been a lot of activity between China and the Philippines, for example. And really what the U.S. is trying to send the message to China is that, yes, right now is a very dynamic political time in the U.S. with the elections coming up, but really that this issue of China and shoring up its support of U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific is an issue that goes beyond administrations.